All right, so today we're going to talk about indicators of water quality. Anybody ever hear of the term turbidity? Yes, some of us yes, some of us no. Okay. Turbidity is the measure of the degree to which water loses its transparency due to the presence of suspended sediment. So typically, we're going to take a glass of water, right, from the faucet. Most times, what should you see? If you had a cup of water in a clear glass or a water bottle even, what should you see? What do you see? Huh? Well, nothing, because it's transparent, right? You can see through it. Kind of, sort of, anyway, right? Might look a little goofy on the other side. But anyway, it's transparent. So the higher the turbidity, okay, when the water starts to lose its transparency, can you start to see through it? No, okay? Because if there are sediments that suspend up in the water to the surface, it's going to be harder to see through it. So, man, I wish I had some pictures. I do, I just don't have them with me. So my husband and I went to Jamaica last summer. And we went on an excursion. And we did the Black River safari kind of thing. So we went out on a boat on the Black River. Anybody ever heard of the Black River? So the gentleman who was leading the tour had a bottle, a clear bottle, right? And he scooped up some water from the Black River. Now, you look over the boat into the water. What do you think it looks like by its name? Black, okay? You can't see, like it looks dark. When he scooped up the water, it looked like this. And it's because you saw what was on the bottom of the river. So the water was actually clear, which was pretty cool because that's not what you would expect by what you see. Anyway, the Mississippi River is an example of a high turbidity body of water because there's a lot of presence of suspended sediment. So therefore, it is not clear. So here are some examples of turbidity. Obviously, low turbidity all the way to the right. And then as we move to the left, much higher turbidity. Okay, so harder to see the actual water or see through the water. Up here you see this NTU. That's just the measurement for turbidity. So some causes of turbidity come from sediments from erosion, which we talked about weathering and erosion last unit. Weathering is what? The way you what? The wearing down of rock, okay? The breaking down of the rock. And then erosion is carrying it away, okay? Picking up, moving it, carrying it away. So we get sediments from erosion. It can also be from resuspended sediments from the bottom of a river. Water or waste discharge, algae growth, or from urban runoff. Okay, so these are just several causes of turbidity. Have y'all ever heard of the pH scale? Yes? So the pH scale, okay, we can use pH to measure the acidity of water. So 0 to 7 is acidic, and then 7 to 14 is considered basic. 7 technically being neutral. So surface freshwater is usually 6.5 to 8. So pretty close to neutral, but shifting towards the basic side. Things like swamps are acidic, and salt water, like the oceans, is very basic. Okay, so changing pH in a stream can be an indicator of increasing pollution, and we talked about pollution yesterday. 2 specific types, point source and non-point source. Who remembers the difference between those? Point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the non-point would be what? Yep, you don't know where it came from. Exactly. That's perfect. Okay. So point source, you know the cause, you know where it came from. Okay. But non-point source is the exact opposite, and we don't know where it came from. Great example too. So causes of changes in pH can also be natural conditions, okay, dumping of waste, and farm runoff. Because with farms, we talk about things like fertilizers, so those can, okay, be in the runoff and get into different types of water. And then results of changes in pH include that most aquatic life cannot withstand water outside the usual pH range. So therefore, this results in death, like you can see in this picture right here. So that takes us to what is known as dissolved oxygen, also DO. Okay, so dissolved oxygen is the amount of oxygen that is in water. So changes in dissolved oxygen occur due to the following things. So rapidly moving water, there would be an increase in dissolved oxygen. Increased temperature, there would be a decrease. Discharge from sewer pipes would also lead to a decrease, okay? So this actually causes an increase in bacteria, which is not good, okay? So when the dissolved oxygen levels drop too low, fish start to die. So the opposite, when dissolved oxygen is high, the water tastes better, but because it's so high with the amount of oxygen, it can actually damage water pipes. So you go from one extreme to the other. So temperature measures how hot or cold something is. We talked a lot about temperature back when we did weather and climate. So extreme low or high temperatures are only tolerated by hardy fish. So even when you have things like a fish tank, right, and you have fish at home or school, the water typically has to be at room temperature. So when you change a fish tank, did anybody ever have fish in here? Did you have to take care of a fish tank? You used to? It's a pain. So when you have a fish tank, no matter how big or small, obviously the larger it is, the more complex, it's a little bit harder to take care of because you've got a lot more water. But when you have a fish tank, you have to let the water sit, because even if you get, turn on the faucet and you don't have it on hot or cold, the water has to be at room temperature. So you've got to let it sit there before you can put it in the fish tank, right? Because if you were to just put hot water or cold water in there and change it out and put the fish right in, what's more than likely going to happen? They're going to die, okay? So we can't have extreme temperature changes, okay, for most fish. but they can be tolerated by certain hardy fish. So changes in temperature occur due to the source of the water, the depth, okay, how deep the water is, the shade from the shoreline, which can also, when you think about the sun, if you were to walk into water, right, and the sun's shining, it's a beautiful day, where's the water the warmest? You walk into the water, the ocean, a pool, it don't matter. Where's the water the warmest? So let's talk about depth. So is it going to be warmer near the surface or towards your feet? I'm not trying to trick anybody. What do you think? The sun is shining, right? Let me see where I can't see. The surface, right? It's gonna be warmer at the surface. Does that make sense, y'all? Okay, and then if you were to start walking in, it's gonna get colder as you go deeper. So the sun is shining, so therefore it will warm the surface. But the deeper you go, that light is not penetrating all the way down. So it's going to start to get cooler the deeper you go, okay? Another change in temperature can be due to factory thermal pollution. Okay, factories play a big role. Remember, we talked about that with runoff as well. By dumping heated water into lakes and rivers. So once again, we're changing the temperature, and therefore this is going to decrease the species in bodies of water because certain fish cannot tolerate those extreme temperatures. Something else we should be familiar with is a nitrate. So this is a fertilizer ingredient that's used in agriculture. So algae and other plants use nitrates as a source of food. So algae have an unlimited source of nitrates, what is known as an algal or algae bloom, okay, begins to grow, which is what you see over here. Has anybody ever seen this in a body of water before? Yeah, okay. So this algae bloom reduces dissolved oxygen. So therefore, it leads to aquatic insects and fish death. So because the dissolved oxygen is dropping, okay, species can die. So looking up here, which river looks to have excess nitrates? Where do you see? Do you see anything like this in either of these pictures? Looks like a bunch of broccoli in there, doesn't it? No, y'all? Does that look like a bunch of broccoli in there? No? I think so. Anyway, do you see anything over here? Or does it kind of look clear? Or do you see maybe a little bit? So the one on the left doesn't look so clear, right? But the one on the right looks a lot clearer, okay? Very good. The broccoli. Just kidding. Broccoli's green. They look like broccoli heads. Nobody sees it? Not one person in here sees the broccoli. I mean, it's not broccoli, but doesn't it look like it? All right, so next are what are known as bioindicators. So these biological indicators are species that are used to monitor the health of an environment or an ecosystem, okay? So populations and individual health. So an example of this are certain amphibians, like this guy down here. Anybody ever see a picture like this before? So we're going to talk a little bit about this. So this shows a food pyramid. Okay, so you've got your producers at the bottom, your primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So there's what is known as bioaccumulation, okay, and biomagnification. And they're slightly different. But what happens is producers, so say we're talking about an aquatic environment, okay, and producers, anybody know what a producer is? They do, very good, okay. Keep that in mind because you're going to need to know that when you get to biology. All right, so producers, okay, they make their own food, right? Yes? So they are known as an autotroph. So they produce their own food. And so now they have food for the consumers above them to eat. So the consumers above them are known as heterotrophs because they rely on others for food. So what happens is these producers, okay, they also, when we're moving up a food chain, okay, they're taking in what's in that water. And then the primary consumers eat the producers, right? Everybody with me? So now, whatever the producers have, the primary consumers are now getting. Do you follow? Then these secondary consumers eat the primary consumers. And now, as we move up the food chain, they're getting even more of that contaminant. Does that make sense? So if we're talking like something like a pesticide or fertilizers, right? They're building up. So they're accumulating as we get higher in the food chain. So the producers will have the smallest amount, but then as we move up, more and more is going to build. So then when you get to your tertiary consumer, they're going to have what? They're going to have the same thing as all the rest of them, but now they are eating larger consumers, right? So they're going to have the most because it's going to build up as it goes through the food chain. Does that make sense? Okay. So they are taking in those pesticides, those toxins. So the toxins are building as they move through the chain.